Acts chapter 7, starting in verse 1. Okay. And the high priest said, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. And he said to them, 'Depart from your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you.' Then he departed from the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. And from there, after his father died, God removed him into this country in which you are now living. And he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot of ground. And yet, even when he had no child, he promised that he would give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him. But God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be aliens in a foreign land, and that they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. And whatever nation to which they shall be in bondage, I myself will judge, and said God. And after that they will come out and serve me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs became jealous of Joseph, and sold him into Egypt. And yet God was with him, and rescued him from all afflictions, and granted him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all of his household. Now a famine came in over all of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction with it, and our fathers could find no food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers there the first time. Let's stop there, 1 through 12. So let's just get a better running start here. So this is Stephen responding to charges, right, of insurrection. This must have happened on January 6th. Maybe that's what that was. I don't know. Maybe not. When they asked him, "Are these things so?" What are the so? What things were so?
Blasphemy.
That's right. It's blasphemy. It is keep saying Jesus' name, right? Keep telling the story of Jesus, and that's what Stephen is being charged with. Is that these accusations that they have heard him say, right? It's not like they heard say. This is say-so charges. That the people were being persuaded, great numbers of people were turning, including even some of the priests, the elders, were being converted. Verse 7 of chapter 6, and the word of God kept spreading, and the number of disciples continued to increase greatly in Jerusalem, and many of the priests were becoming obedient to the faith here. So he's answering the charges of that verse. Why are you converting people? Why are you switching people over? And why are you messing with our traditions?
The customs of Moses.
Right. And it's funny that they mention Moses in it when, there are two heroes, superheroes in Israel. There's Moses and the prophets. Those are the two superheroes, if I can call them two. But there, and so they're saying, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" We'll see all in 7 here eventually that he's recounting a large history for us, but it's not an educational lesson. This is not a. I didn't know if you know this, guys, but here's some facts that I've just uncovered. Let me review them for you. He's not doing that. He's not giving them a history lesson. He's setting them up for what you have done, what your fathers have done, what your fathers' fathers have done, and he's setting up for a huge accusation. It's the opening statement of a lawyer in a trial is what he's doing here. So he starts with the first person, which is Abraham, and it talks about Abraham having no inheritance. But Abraham claims it. I mean, he's got no children to give to, nothing. It's that faith of Abraham. Steve, you're about to say something.
And that was which verse?
5. And he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot of ground, not even a little place.
I took that to be, you remember how he never actually fully received,
That's right.
what he had been promised.
The promise, right. He never actually did.
He partially did, but he never actually put stakes down for permanent. He was temporarily in Canaan, and he went to Egypt.
Right.
Or his people, the Israelites did, but he never really settled.
That's right.
So the promise was real, but he didn't ever fully inherit it.
Right.
Or fully receive it.
But from Abraham's point of view, he had it. It was his. He accepted it. If I may say it now, I don't know.
He received it.
He received it. It was his faith that accepted God's promise.
Yeah.
Even though he couldn't see it, touch it, feel it, he had
Right.
received it.
He took it by faith. Yeah, exactly right.
Why is that part of an accusation to them, to these elders? What is he trying to, what is Stephen setting them up for?
I guess like the promise that we have that's out there that's certain but yet not fully received, that's kind of where he was heading.
Right, and acting like the God never said it. I mean, it's kind of, they're, I don't want to say this. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just keep reading. We'll get to eventually to that question, I guess. He quotes some Old Testament stuff here in 5 and 6 and 7. 6 says, "But God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be aliens in a foreign land, and that they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years." And that came about, right?
Yep, it did.
Okay. "And whatever nation to which they shall be in bondage, I myself will judge. After that they will come out and serve me in this place." What is he trying to say there? Apparently that's Exodus 8, or 3, excuse me, Exodus 3.
I mean, his audience should recognize what he's talking about.
All right.
Well, part of this, I think, is about the timing of things.
Okay.
Is that, well, I don't know about this society, but in our society today, we can't even wait, 2 minutes for a baked potato in the microwave.
Yeah, it is too long, I do.
And the idea of waiting for something, especially for generational. In other words, I'm not doing it for gain myself. My great-great-grandkids will get this benefit.
Right.
Or we'll see it realized then. But the whole idea of this is that you don't know God's timing. With the twinkling of the eye business, it could be literally tomorrow, next week, 100 years from now, but it will still happen, as God said. And I think to me, that's a lesson a lot of this is. It's not so much, the other angle, it's about the timing, in that, God's time is different than ours.
That we don't have the same time scale that God has.
Exactly.
Like you said, we want that instamatic time event. It's got to happen by Friday, or it just doesn't. It's not going to happen.
Then it's not God.
It's not God after that.
Yeah, exactly.
And to remind them that God operates on a totally different time scale than
So
what
many
you guys
people,
are.
it's like, all right, I give God 24 hours, and if it's not here by daylight tomorrow,
Yeah.
then it wasn't meant to be, or whatever.
Well, I prayed for God for this. Well, when? Well, yesterday, and it hasn't happened. That kind of thing.
I think, Howard, the way you started, preference, you said, you almost want to read it all in one.
Right.
I think the reason is because if you put everything we're talking about in the context from what you wanted to read, if you look at from the beginning of Abraham, he's building the case for faith. And how you build the case for faith with the Jews is the prophets and Moses.
Right.
And that's what all this is about. Just what you said. God said it, it's going to happen, and it's on his time scale. And that's the thing. If you read all this like you were talking about, every example is all about that, and ultimately the prophets and Moses, because Jesus was the prototype of Moses.
Right.
Moses was the prototype of Jesus,
Right.
our Lord.
Yeah.
Remember that's what this is all about. He's setting them up, like you said, a defense lawyer. He's going to lay the groundwork. Y'all know this. You're the teachers. Let me show you what the prophets and Moses said about the Messiah. So I think it's, if you kept it all in one room, it ties in like a perfect, like a glove.
Stephen, what is his background? I mean, what authority does he have to speak to this here? Well, what I know is he's a food service worker.
Yes.
That's what I know.
And he was full of the Holy Spirit, so that's one thing.
Yeah,
Plus, he was doing miracles like the others
That's
were,
right.
Exactly.
which was
That's
unusual.
right.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there was evidence of the work, there was evidence of the power that was
And
there.
obviously he knew the history and tradition of the law.
Yeah, and that's an amazing thing here.
He did. He knew everything. He was a good practicing Jew, probably.
Yeah,
Prior to
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
He knew. So that's what gets me too. And he knew both sides of the coin.
You mean he didn't graduate from Pharisee school and have the right degree? And so in 8 it says, and he gave him the covenant of circumcision. Why is that important to tell these Jews about the circumcision? Why is that a key word to them? Why would he bring it up?
Well, that was a huge thing, circumcision for the male line, which male was the line in those days. You didn't consider the women. That's what the Jews, that was all the way through here, the Jews took that as the sign that they were, that's the covenant, that's God's promise.
That was
And it
the
ties it back to Abraham directly. And that was a big deal for them, so they could tie their genealogical tree back to them. And so to me, that's like, for a long time here, is my relatives came across from the Mayflower. It's that type of thing.
Yeah, it was an outward sign that you were Jewish,
right.
that was,
Yeah.
and evidently that wasn't the normal practice.
Of all the other
of
nations?
all the other
No,
nations, right?
no.
So it set them apart.
Yeah, it definitely, it put a mark on him, if I may say.
Exactly.
And he's going to remind them that about how, while you may be circumcised, you're acting uncircumcised.
Right.
And that's kind of where he's heading towards this, is again, setting them up, that, your fathers and all these people that you admire so much, here's all the great things they are doing, and you're saying you're part of that. Are you part of that? We're about to get eventually into that. So Abraham became in 8 the father of Isaac, and then he starts this thing about Isaac and circumcised him, and talks about all the circumcisions there. The patriarchs, those are the brothers of Joseph, right? And rescued him from all afflictions and granted him favor. We're talking about Joseph there. King of Egypt, blah, 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 blah. And he made him a governor over Egypt and all his household, 11. And then he sets this up for an issue here. Now a famine came over Egypt, Canaan, great affliction. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent his father there for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's important. He says first time.
Right.
Because
He's emphasizing
Yeah,
when they
for a
came
reason.
when the brothers came, did they recognize Joseph, his brother? No. They didn't recognize. Almost a parallel when God first comes. People don't recognize.
Well, remember Joseph now. You remember Joseph was king over, he was Jewish. He was second in command. Basically, he was a leader over the Gentile world. I mean, it's a prototype of Christ. Christ came to come and he's the Messiah for the world. First time he was rejected by his people. The second time he won't be. So this is all the parallels with Joseph. That's exactly what he said. Now, there's a reason people read over the first time, they don't put two and two together. Well, that's because Christ was rejected the first time. But they'll accept him if you go to Revelation, the rest of it. They'll accept him the second time. And Jesus, he was a Jew over Gentiles. Well, Jesus is a Jew over Gentiles now.
Okay, let's. Wouldn't normally do this, but let's go ahead and continue on 13
All right.
through 19 at least. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family was disclosed to Pharaoh. And Joseph sent word and invited Jacob, his father, and all his relatives to come to him, 75 persons in all. That's a dinner party. And Jacob went down to Egypt, and there passed away, he and our fathers. And from there they were removed to Shechem and laid in the tomb which Abraham had purchased for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. But as the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt, until there arose another king over Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph. And it was he who took shrewd advantage of our race and mistreated our fathers so that they would expose their infants and they would not survive. Let's stop there, because we're about to bring in Moses. So he's giving some background about the trials of the Jewish nation, and it started with 75, and it grew from there. 17 is a puzzling phrase for me. Well, not really that puzzling, but phrase of note. But as the time of promise was approaching, the time of promise? What time?
Wow. This, I mean, from the fall of man to the crucifixion was all, to me, I mean, this is just what, it was a preset time. God said, on this day, my son will be crucified, right? So everything else has to line up in a timeline, the way that God sees it. And I think that's what you see here. That time was approaching. The whole timeline of history as it went forward was approaching for the people to move into the promised land.
Yeah, remember what you read, 400 years roughly? So that's what it was. 400 years were almost up. And you go to the book of Daniel. Daniel actually talks about Babylon too. It's kind of the same preference. That's here also.
Right.
The time, 400 years, and the Jews should have known this. 400 years, remember what Abraham said. So I think the time was near. He said, okay, now it's time for me to send Moses.
Right.
Or what they call Moses, a redeemer.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's what the 400 years was up, basically. 400 something years, 400 years.
Yeah. So again, God's time scale completely different than our time scale, but yet it is a dependable time scale. Does that mean that there's definitely predestination no matter what?
Nope.
No.
Do you not mean we're not predetermined to follow a certain path?
Well,
No,
yes
it's-
and and no.
Yes and a no.
There you go. I just told him my fifth grade. I did the same thing. I said, what's the answer? Yes or no?
Yes or no.
And we can go to scripture where
That's
I
right.
told you about David in First Samuel. Remember Saul had him surrounded? He goes to God and says, God, are they going to turn me over? God says, yep. And he says, David goes back to God and says, God, is Saul going to kill me? He goes, oh, he's going to kill you. What did David do? Took off. Wait, God said it was going to happen. That's it. I mean, the thing is, if you know, we have free will, and we grapple with this all the time, free will and God's will. How does he make it all go? He does. So it's yes and no.
Yeah, a truthful answer is it's yes and no.
Yes, that's
And
exactly
not
right.
an or,
Because
but-
it talks about both. It mentions
Yeah.
both, honestly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's
It
the
mentions
truthful
both, so yeah,
answer.
yeah. But we know God is fair and honest, and so, you know,
Yeah.
And sovereign, right.
yeah.
Okay. So in this, back in 13, and on the second visit, Joseph made himself known. So that it's just interesting. I don't want to pull too much from the first and the second visit, but it really does seem like the Jews will know on the second time Christ comes.
So, yeah.
They ignored him on the first, but the second will hear. That's technically not what it says if we just use the technical words here.
I'm not sure about 100%, you said all, but I.
Yeah,
point
I said
taken.
all. I didn't mean to say all.
Well, I don't know if you did or not, I took it as all, but you know what I mean?
I meant
be
more of
Jews,
a
but
y'all.
there will be many though.
There'll be
coming
many,
right,
certainly.
at that end,
Yeah.
that second time.
Right.
But I think there's always be, that's where just black and white, you know, is always hard to agree.
Not all though.
Yeah, because you know, go to Romans, I think it's 10 with Paul. Paul really,
Yeah, 9, 10, and 11.
he really nails just what you're saying. It makes perfect sense. That's why I love Paul was phenomenal because he was all Jew, but he was all Christian.
Yeah.
And when he explained the way you just, okay, that's exactly how you have to understand it.
Right.
So just go read.
Yeah,
9, 10,
chapters
11.
9, 10, and 11 of Romans, that's where he doubles down on about the Jews coming in big numbers this next time, but right now, very, very few.
Right.
And not all are all. When he says all, I mean, everybody, you and I discussed it many times, the law. I mean, God knows your heart. You had people who went and sacrificed animals, but they didn't really, let me just do it because I have to do it.
Yeah,
When your heart's not there. Well, that's what, if you read the scripture, they're not really, yeah, but they're not. So not all is all, God knows your heart. You know, like I said, everybody comes to church on Sunday morning as a Christian. No, we don't know that.
No.
We don't know that. You know, I would doubt it too, you know, quite frankly. And,
But once they look upon whom they had pierced, and they'll realize this is the Messiah, they'll believe. When I heard two guys were talking about that, one that was a Jewish guy, and he said, well, when he comes, again, we'll ask him if he was here before. That was that. But I think when they see him come, they won't have to ask. Oh, no, yeah.
It said first time he came as a lamb, the second time he's coming as a lion. So it's not going to be,
Right.
there will be no doubt.
Right.
You know, the second time.
Plus, he'll have the T-shirt. You know,
Yeah.
he'll have the T-shirt.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop here.
So
We're going to introduce, it's 20. We're going to start at 20 next time. And this is where we bring in what I would call Moses number 1, because there's really 2 types of Moseses here. So we're going to talk about that here. Okay.
And also,
Moses 1.
which is interesting, Moses 2 times
2.
2.
Yep.
First time they rejected him, he ran off into the.
Yeah.
It's the parallels are unbelievable
Yeah.
with the Lord.
So much of the Old Testament points right to
Yeah.
it.
Oh, it does. That's amazing. So, like I said, it's a long chapter. It's going to be weird how we're going to approach this here.
I want to share some. I learned something this week, and I didn't realize this. Why in the New Testament the Jews got so upset when they called Jesus Lord, but they didn't get upset when they kind of used Elohim, which is God. Lord in the Greek means Yahweh.
Yes.
So it was the only word for Yahweh, God. That's why they got so. You can say Elohim, there's little Elohim in capital E. They didn't get too upset. But when they called him Lord, they would call him Yahweh. And that's when the Jews, and I didn't realize that there's a difference between Lord and God. Elohim, because Elohim can be kind of separate. But when they called him Lord, they would say, hey, he's Yahweh. So I learned that this week in the Greek. I didn't know that. That's why they got so upset when you called him Lord. It's interesting.
There's so much of the language, some of these that we
Oh, yeah.
don't understand.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. But Yahweh was their word, really the true word for God. And when he said, Lord Yahweh, that's when I got ticked off.
Especially when it's singular in reference.
Yes.
It's the one and only
Exactly.
the Yahweh.
Is Yahweh the one that they actually couldn't say?
Acronyms.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the word, he who should not be named. type
Yeah,
thing.
yes. So when he said not Yahweh, it was out of reverence, and that's God.
But language changes so much that I've often wondered, whether King James, I'm not talking about the versions of the Bible, or the translations, but a word like you're talking about here meant this, but 50 years later it meant something completely
Oh,
different.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was at a Chinese restaurant,
Yep.
this is years ago back, when I lived there, learned a few language things, and I was meeting an old engineer that I had met there that worked for me somewhere else. And we went to a Chinese restaurant, and I said, I was just talking to the server, I was calling her over or something, and the engineer that used to work for me, and then we were at a table with a number of people, all but grabbed me, and that's not allowed, and just basically said, shut up. She didn't say it that way. I said, why? She said, because the young lady, which is what in China, we call young lady, like, miss, can you come give me some more tea, whatever. She said, that means something to do with a hooker or something. And I went, but that was only like 5 years ago. She said, oh, no, it's different. And it's not like just kind of like gay old time versus gay something different now. It's just that it's only a few years span.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how many of the words we've messed that up.
Well,
We as in the society have messed that up.
look into this. Within the last 8 to 10 years, remember they found that second batch of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah.
And this is what's so amazing. I still believe it's God opening up more knowledge for us. They found out that some of the words, and it's not the King James fault, because that's all they had at the time.
Right, right.
They found out that some words that were translated, it really doesn't hurt the translation, but it really wasn't right. A couple of words that, just what you're saying, when it was written, the original text on they found did not mean what it said. You got it because of the language that had changed. And it's pretty interesting. There's a couple of Old Testament in Deuteronomy, I think it's 82, no 32. There's some things that kind of changed because it was translated wrong.
Right.
It wasn't their fault. Again, everybody said King James. You know, they did the best they could, but we found more information to know. No, that wasn't the right thing to say. It should have been this.
And that's when we dive in to really analyze words.
Yeah,
I always cringe a little bit because of exactly that.
exactly.
Is Stephen like witnessing to him in his talk to him, because he's telling him the history, and look how it's all unfolded, and he's talking about Christ, and they're saying, we don't want you talking in that name, and he's saying, he's bringing them up to what everything else is fallen into place, and they have to, like they did with the others, they have to make up lies to accuse them. They can't just go over it's really the issue. They try to get you to shut up, so they have to make up accusations to shut you up.
What's interesting is Stephen here presenting the Gospels to give them an opportunity to turn, or is he presenting an accusation?
I think in a lot of places they do both. They do it like an accusation to get them to like think about it, and then he tries to give them a way to respond.
So I wonder when we get to the end of chapter 7
We'll
if
see
he
how it
actually
does.
does
You know, that's
offer
what
that
I'm
opportunity.
gonna have to do some reading too.
Because there's a point in time, right, when we're presenting the gospel, whether we're presenting it to give them a choice to turn,
Or just sort it out. Yeah.
putting it out there,
Mhm.
and not really giving them an option. It's an interesting question, Frank. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right,
Sounds
Stay tuned, come back.
Stay tuned. That's right.
Stay back in time.
All right, what are you guys praying for? We got